President Biden just sitting on the beach right now in Rehoboth, Delaware, literally at this very moment, just staring at the waves, contemplating how many years he's got left on this earth, not doing his job at all, drinking an Ensure colada, just sitting around doing nothing. That's what's happening. On the schedule this week for the president, zero, zilch, zip. Oh, and did I mention nada? Coming up today, Curtis Houck will be with us this hour from NewsBusters. We'll talk about Kamala Harris needing an emotional support running mate for her first interview on CNN this week. Stupid. Keith Kellogg, the Army General Keith Kellogg, will be with us at 4:30. He was in Arlington National Cemetery on Monday as the Biden administration funded NPR spreads lies about the events that transpired there. Congressman Jim Jordan joins us at 5 o'clock. We talk about election meddling being done by the left yet again. We'll talk to him about that. And at 5:30, two members of Gold Star families, the mother-in-law of Marine Sergeant Nicole G. and the father of Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover, will be joining us. It was at their invitation that President Trump was in Arlington on Monday at Arlington National Cemetery to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown and then to visit the grave sites of these fallen heroes. It was their invitation. And so we are in the midst. It's if you're a listener of this program, you knew way more about this story by Monday evening than anyone else on the planet, than anyone else. And part of the reason for that is because we had on our show Monday Hung Cao, the candidate for Senate in Virginia. And Hung Cao was standing there. He's a retired Navy captain. He was standing alongside President Trump and Tulsi Gabbard and General Kellogg, who's going to be joining us, the Gold Star families. You could see him in all of the images of President Trump at Arlington. And when we had him on Monday, he was relaying that there was something going on where you had Arlington officials who worked for Joe Biden, the Biden administration, trying to upend President Trump's access to Arlington, or at least the people around him, their access to Arlington. You knew Monday evening that something was amiss here. And my sense of all of this, we've been working the phones like crazy trying to get to the bottom of what the hell actually happened here. But my sense of all of this is that the Trump campaign, by and large, didn't want the Biden administration's pettiness to be the story of their visit to Arlington. Their visit to Arlington was a solemn one. President Trump goes to Arlington, lays a wreath, accompanies the families to Section 60, where we honor the war dead from Afghanistan and Iraq. He stands there at their invitation. They take photos together at their invitation. And they leave that event grateful that President Trump came once again at their invitation. To reiterate for the 10,000th time. And the last thing, this is just my educated perspective on this. I think the last thing the Trump campaign wanted was to let petty nonsense distract from the solemn mission that was going on Monday. But leave it to the Biden administration and to NPR, funded by the Biden administration, to turn this into petty nonsense, to turn this into a crap storm, a partisan event. So here's the way NPR is presenting things today. Trump campaign staff had altercation with official at Arlington National Cemetery. That's the headline on their piece. And of course, what that is meant to do is convey to the reader, oh, there goes Trump again. So disrespectful of the troops and in particular the Gold Star families. Awful, 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 awful. And this is the topic they would like to talk about, the one that they're inventing, rather than why wasn't Joe Biden at this event? Why wasn't Kamala Harris, who's now running for president, at this event? The current vice president of the United States. Why haven't they been at these wreath layings? Why are the families so upset with the Biden-Harris administration? No, none of that's being litigated here. No. In fact, Trump is the villain in the story where Trump actually did the decent thing. They say two members of Donald Trump's campaign staff had a verbal and physical altercation Monday with an official at Arlington National Cemetery where the former president participated in a wreath-laying ceremony, NPR has learned. A source with knowledge of the incident said the cemetery official tried to prevent Trump staffers from filming and photographing in a section where recent U.S. casualties are buried. All right, let's pause on that sentence for a moment because you're starting to get a sense of who began whatever chaos may have existed there. A Biden administration official tried to get in the way of the people that were there with the Gold Star families, with President Trump, from taking pictures of that event. The rules at Arlington, for those who are curious, are that they ask people not to take pictures of people who are mourning if you don't have their permission to do it. And that makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't want to take photographs of someone in a deep state of grief who doesn't even realize you're doing it and then use that photo for something. But the Gold Star families invited Trump to be there with a photographer. They wanted to commemorate that moment. They were grateful that he was there. So the question about that rule, it's satisfied. The mourners in this case are saying, please photograph this. Please capture this. That's what we'd like. NPR continues here. The source said Arlington officials had made clear that only cemetery staff members would be authorized to take photographs or film in the area known as Section 60. They're just making it up as they go along. When the cemetery official tried to prevent Trump campaign staff from entering Section 60, campaign staff verbally abused and pushed the official aside, according to the source. Now, I'm hearing something pretty different than this. I'm hearing that this was an Army colonel who jumped out in front of the videographer and said and blocked this guy from trying to get in there. The photographer tried to block him from getting in. And the Trump people were saying, well, wait a second. No, this is what the Gold Star families wanted. This was authorized. This was already discussed. What are you doing? So some Biden administration official causes a scene, and now Trump's being blamed for it. Trump participated in the event to mark the third anniversary of the deadly attack on U.S. troops in Afghanistan, says NPR, as U.S. forces withdrew from the country. 13 U.S. service members were killed in the attack. The Trump campaign has blamed President Biden and Vice President Harris, NPR says. Well, that makes sense considering they were in charge. That's also who the Gold Star families hold accountable. In a statement to NPR, Stephen Chung, the Trump campaign spokesman, strongly rejected the notion of a physical altercation, adding, quote, "We are prepared to release footage if such defamatory claims are made." He goes on, "The fact is that a private photographer was permitted on the premises, and for whatever reason, an unnamed individual, clearly suffering from a mental health episode, decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony," says Chung. So there's the Trump campaign. The response is some emotionally incontinent whack job tried to stop what was already agreed upon, that there'd be a photographer there capturing images of this. The Trump campaign declined to make that footage immediately available, NPR says, trying to suggest that they're lying about this. So that's what's happening. And so the press is running wild here. NPR, they kick off the lie. Everybody else is running with it. How many of these stories have you seen, by the way, where some lie gets told and then all of the lefty news outlets, they all run around, well, there's a report that indicates the blah, 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 blah. And then it's the Nancy Pelosi thing. What do they call it? The wrap-up smear? Nancy Pelosi calls this the wrap-up smear. You say something untrue. You spread it all over the place. You damage the credibility of your political opponent. And then whether or not it's true, it does the damage. It has the effect they intended, and then we move on to something else. That's the game. It always is the game. And she calls it the wrap-up smear. It's a strategy. People use it, she says, having used it a lot. Here's CNN today trying to turn this into a massive Trump scandal.
This morning, new details on an altercation involving Donald Trump's team at Arlington National Cemetery. The incident happened while the former president was visiting Section 60, the burial site for recent U.S. casualties, during his visit on Monday. Trump's now suggesting on Truth Social that the problem stemmed from his campaign's use of photography. CNN's Elena Treen has more from Washington, D.C. There was some back and forth here about what happened from the park and the Trump campaign. What are you learning this morning?
Well, there's still a lot of details that are unclear here, Sarah, and we are still trying to learn more, get more information. But what is clear, and both sides agree on, is that there was some sort of incident. And you can see that where you saw that video of Donald Trump laying.
So why would the Trump campaign provoke an incident? Why would the Trump campaign? It doesn't even make any sense. Why would they initiate an incident at this? That's the last thing they would do. Just as a tactical matter, You wouldn't do that because you don't want to distract from the fact that President Trump is there to honor the families and the fallen. That's why he's there. So why would the Trump campaign initiate this? You and I both know that some lunatic really tried to turn this into an incident. You can't photograph that. What? The Gold Star families wanted Trump there.
Flowers at the burial site for some of these recent fallen soldiers, that's known as Section 60. That is really where some of this incident, we're told, has taken place. Now, we had heard the Trump campaign had said that someone who had worked at the cemetery had blocked members of Donald Trump's campaign from joining him in that moment where he was laying those flowers. And part of this, Donald Trump had argued, stemmed from the use of photography. Now, Trump's campaign and Donald Trump himself have been circulating a statement from some of the family members of some of the soldiers who were killed during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, particularly those who were killed at Kabul's Abbey Gate.
Yeah, the statement, just to share it with you, is a good one, and it is trying to put to bed this ridiculous attack on Donald Trump for being a decent human being. They said, "We'd like to express our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to President Donald J. Trump for his presence at the recent Section 60 gathering, honoring our children and their fallen brothers and sisters on the 3-year anniversary of the Abbey Gate bombing. The president and his team conducted themselves with nothing but the utmost respect and dignity for all of our service members, especially our beloved children. We had given our approval for President Trump's official videographer and photographer to attend the event, ensuring these sacred moments of remembrance were respectfully captured, and so we can cherish these memories forever. We are deeply grateful to the president for taking the time to honor our children and for standing alongside us in our grief, offering his unwavering support during such a difficult time. His compassion and respect meant more than words can express. With sincere gratitude." And the signatories here include two of our guests this afternoon. One of them is Darren Hoover. He's the father of Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover. The other is Christy Shamblin. She's the mother-in-law of Sergeant Nicole G. And they're going to be joining us coming up at 5:30. We're going to speak to both of them about what their experience was, what they make of all of this. The attacks keep coming. That CNN clip I played for you is mostly I'll admit, a kind of a dry recitation of some of the basics here, including the response by the families. But other CNN coverage has not been in any way objective. Breonna Keeler today was really making this out to be a big Trump scandal on CNN.
The Trump campaign is facing backlash for an apparent altercation at Arlington National Cemetery between the Trump team and cemetery staff.
The first few words prejudice the listener against Trump.
The former president was at Arlington on Monday to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Abbey Gate bombing when 13 U.S. service members died in Kabul, Afghanistan. According to NPR, while there, Trump campaign staff verbally abused and pushed a cemetery official when the official tried to prevent the Trump campaign from filming in Section 60, which is a section of the cemetery reserved for those recently killed in America's wars abroad.
All right, so she makes it seem like, oh, look at him. He's just so disrespectful. Again, you just heard from the families. It's the complete opposite. And then here's General Wesley Clark. That's her guest, the retired Supreme Allied Commander. Wesley Clark is here to crap all over Trump.
Well, I think it's totally inappropriate that Donald Trump has used that part of Arlington Cemetery that way for a partisan political purpose.
At the invitation of the Gold Star families, the mourners themselves.
But it's deeper than that. First of all, we know that in private, he doesn't respect service. He doesn't respect sacrifice.
What a garbage statement. What a complete garbage statement. And so that's what this is. So it's funny. They're saying, oh, Trump politicized all of this. You know, I often, when we hear the phrase politicized, I think typically you and I will react. A lot of people react, and it's pejorative if you say something's been politicized. But here's the reality of living in a republic. If you're going to make a decision about who to elect, it is important that they elevate issues in front of you to convey what they consider to be important. Is that politicizing? So if President Trump makes his presence known at Arlington, at the invitation of the Gold Star families, and knows that by extension that there will be voters who look upon that favorably and say, you know what, I would rather have Donald Trump as the commander-in-chief. Is that illegitimate for President Trump to do? Is it illegitimate for President Trump to share images from that, to help elevate those Gold Star families while simultaneously conveying to the public that he cares about them, that he would like to return to be commander-in-chief to prevent the types of deaths that we saw at Abbey Gate, that's not illegitimate at all. In fact, it's the way I expect any decent person to run for office. Show me what's important to you. Show me. And when it comes to negative politicization, it's precisely what the Biden people are doing right now. This is Biden's and Harris's, by extension, who was the last person in the room in the Afghanistan decision. This was the moment the public turned against them. This is their biggest political liability. Those deaths in Afghanistan, that disastrous exit, the decision-making that led to it. Everything about it was an utter disaster, and it opened the eyes of a lot of people who weren't really paying attention to just how bad Biden had been before that. But after that moment, they knew. And so what is the answer here? This is an op. This is a psyop run by a government-funded news outlet being pushed along by Biden officials to make it seem like Trump's decency is actually the problem, and pay no attention to the fact that these people would still be alive. These heroes would still be alive were it not for what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did. And that's just true. And we all know if Kamala Harris decided to go to a wreath laying at Arlington, there'd be 20 times as many cameras on scene. The media would be all over it. They'd be taking pictures of everything. Oh, look at Kamala. Look how nice she is. It's all so crazy. Richard's in Manassas now on line 3. Richard, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, thank you as always for taking my calls. So my history, following my Afghanistan deployment, I got stationed at Arlington National Cemetery. It is an Army post, no different than Fort Myer, Fort Belvoir, or any other fort.
Yeah.
So these people are GS-13s, 12s, military people from the Army that work at the cemetery. So I find it when I was there, it was a very nonpartisan, non-political place. For somebody that works for the cemetery to come barging in and starting a kerfuffle with the Trump team while there's family members there, and they're recognized. If you're buried at Arlington, your family has passes. They would have had these passes, had to have been known to the cemetery staff. So I find this all very very sketchy on how this all came down.
And also, it just doesn't
match up with anything I experienced.
And Richard, having worked there at Arlington National Cemetery, if a former president of the United States arrived, especially at the invitation of Gold Star families, and had a photographer in tow, once again at the request of the families, would you, as somebody who worked at Arlington, just start a scene at that moment? You're not allowed to do this?
So whenever there was somebody of a former president's stature on the cemetery, it was a very important person event. It was VIP. That was, everyone is aware we're going to have the former president on the cemetery. It's not like he just snuck in the trunk of someone's car. He has a Secret Service detail. It's a big deal whenever a president, former or current, shows up on the cemetery.
Yeah, and so you wouldn't, in other words, cause a scene, knowing that.
No, you wouldn't.
No, thank you, Richard. I appreciate your service in the call today very much. Okay, hold on. Joining us in just moments, Curtis Houck joins us from NewsBusters. We'll talk about the media's coverage of literally everything, including this. It's also crazy. And Kamala Harris's first interview, she requires assistance. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 3:36, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Keith Kellogg. General Keith Kellogg will be with us at 4:30. Congressman Jim Jordan is here at 5 o'clock. And then at 5:30, members of the Gold Star families. Christy Shamblin is here, the mother-in-law of Marine Sergeant Nicole G. And Darren Hoover is also here with us, the Gold Star father of Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We've got a couple things. One, I'll tell you, one of the advantages I have in being a radio host is I'm also an editor for the Daily Caller, and I can tell you that right now the Daily Caller is working on even more information about what exactly went down on Monday at what should have just been a solemn event as President Trump visited to to meet with the Gold Star families and to pay his respects. There's a lot more interesting stuff coming out, and I'm not going to get ahead of them on what their reporting is just yet, but it's on its way. Additionally, J.D. Vance at a campaign event just now had some remarks about all of this. He was talking about Kamala Harris specifically. I think is he in Ohio right now? He's doing a campaign event as we speak. Here he is speaking to the crowd.
But to have those 13 Americans lose their lives and not fire a single person is disgraceful. Kamala Harris is disgraceful. We're going to talk about a story out of those 13 brave, innocent Americans who lost their lives. It's that Kamala Harris is so asleep at the wheel that she won't even do an investigation into what happened, and she wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
That's the audio. That's J.D. Vance saying Kamala Harris can go to hell. And that's him in Pennsylvania. He's that event right now in Pennsylvania. Just happened moments ago. Here to talk to us about everything that is developing on this story and so much more, I want to bring in Curtis Houck now. He's the managing editor over at NewsBusters, and he joins us on the phone. Curtis, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Vince. Always a pleasure.
So this story about Arlington National Cemetery, designed to make Trump look like the bad guy for having gone to visit with the Gold Star families, it gets kicked off by NPR last night. They're alleging that the Trump team was stomping all over the place and mean to the staff there at Arlington. And then what has the media done with that claim since then?
Well, cable has been running wild with this. We had CNN on News Central, all 3 hours of their show. Jim Acosta was all over this. Breonna Keeler did a segment. She made her comments known last week, a few weeks ago, denigrating J.D. Vance's service, despite the fact that she is the wife of a Green Beret, so she should know better. She brought in Wesley Clark, of all people, to condemn what happened on Monday. Morning Joe said that the family served as a prop for a political campaign, and CNN's Alana Treen actually went out on CNN and brought up the fact that the families that were there supported former President Trump being there.
Yes.
And she literally said, however, the Arlington National Cemetery, in a statement to CNN, said that doesn't matter. And I'm like, what? Excuse me? And they even have brought in the Harris Walls campaign for an interview about this morning to say, what disturbs you about this? Not anything Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were doing on Monday, i.e. nothing other than paper statements through spokespeople. What concerns you about this? And, of course, the suckers and losers nonsense and all the predictable nonsense that we've are used to expecting from these people.
Yeah. So there's nothing even amounting to a fact-finding mission involved here. It's just a government-funded news outlet, NPR, tries to slander Trump and his visit to the Gold Star families and to Arlington, and then all these other news outlets carry the water of the left.
And one more thing, I think this is so critical here. They're kvetching, they're belly aching. Treen did this, John Berman did this, that this was hallowed ground. And they did this whole, unfortunately, yet another place is becoming political. And you're like, wait a second. Donald Trump didn't give a rally. He didn't give a rally speech. Donald Trump didn't even give remarks, formal remarks at a podium. He just went there solemnly, and really only spoke to the families there. It's not like he invited the press to come around. And when a president goes to Arlington, of course they, get the mantle of not having campaign staff there because the White House press pool is with them there. So the campaigns can theoretically then use whatever footage the news networks pick up when a president goes to visit there on Memorial Day or Veterans Day.
Yeah, exactly. You know how this game works. And this is yet another one of these stories that you can instantly sniff out the anatomy of it. You're like, oh, this is garbage. And you're going to watch it fall apart in its entirety over the days ahead. And, of course, the press will never come back with a mea culpa for any of it. We've seen it happen far too many times, Curtis. Hey, let me move on to something else that's going on here. We got an announcement yesterday that Kamala Harris is going to finally sit down for her first interview on television as the nominee of the party, having been anointed that by the Democrats. But she's doing the interview on CNN with her running mate. So Tim Walz is going to sit alongside of her in order to do this interview? What do you make of this?
So much for female empowerment, Vince, Like, I thought this was the time, this is a feminist era, but yet, she's pulling the Gen Z. People are making this joke on Twitter that, she's pulling a Gen Z move where they think their parents need to accompany them to a job interview. And this is the point that Scott Jennings of CNN, one of the few actual conservatives there, was making on air last night, that, like, what does this say about her judgment? Yes, the vice president, always says the last person in the room, but at the end of the day, the president needs to be able to make decisions, be able to think on their feet. And how can she do that if she thinks she needs a chaperone, or her campaign thinks she needs a chaperone? So that's one angle to this. And then Dana Bash, it's a question of which Dana Bash is going to show up. Is it the Dana Bash of the debate, the June 27th debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Or is it going to be the Dana Bash who interviewed Kamala Harris a few years ago and really sucked up to her? I would also say that there's the concern that she talked about the border czar. She's been one of those people out in front saying it's false to claim that she was the border czar after Donald Trump, was the Supreme Court ruled that he could stay on the ballot in Colorado and states couldn't throw him off the ballot. She said it was unfortunate for America. So it's a question of which Dana Bash is going to show up, which person is it going to be. And when networks are competing like this, all these networks wanted to talk to her. You wonder, my boss, Tim Graham, I got to credit him for this. He was saying, you wonder what CNN offered them to get them to say yes.
Yeah, you definitely do. You're trying to figure out what led to this, because they were pretty explicit about the fact. Politico was even talking about earlier this week that the campaign was shopping around. They weren't quite sure who this was going to land with. And I mentioned yesterday, when you find out it's Dana Bash at CNN, that feels like kind of a dubious honor. That, I got the interview because they believe I'm going to be the easiest questioner. That is the obvious math here. The question becomes, can we browbeat Dana Bash into being interesting? Is it possible? I like when the right goes after these guys for being lefty hacks ahead of these big moments, because sometimes it compels them to behave themselves. I mean, look, Dana Bash already experienced this. Dana Bash and Jake Tapper were the moderators of that debate with Joe Biden. And in the week leading up to it, the right pulled up every one of their left-wing sins and said, hey, is this going to be what you are this week? Are you going to be this? And did you notice all they did was ask questions and sit back and let the two men fight it out?
Right. Is she going to be the person who did that, or is she going to the person who said inflation looks good back last year in an interview with Nancy Pelosi, then wondering why we aren't giving credit to Joe Biden? Yeah. I mean, you just wonder, is she going to ask about Afghanistan? Is she going to talk about inflation? You really just wonder if she starts veering off into all these questions with Tim Walz about, aren't the Republicans weird, or start asking about Jack Smith, or focus a lot on abortion. Those are really some of the keys you're going to be looking for. And the fact that it's not live isn't helping either.
It's weird. Like, why would you have to bring a helicopter running mate with you to your interview? You're right about that whole, like, I don't know if it's Gen Z specific, but the idea that, like, somebody would bring their parent with them to an interview. Years ago now, I want to say almost a decade ago, I remember I was doing an interview with I was interviewing someone for a job, and they brought their wife with them. And literally, the wife sat in on the interview, and she kept saying stuff like, tell him about the time make sure to tell him about, she's literally sitting in the room. Suffice it to say, and I feel bad for the guy, but we didn't hire him, Curtis.
Oh, imagine that. But I guess on the left, it's fine. I guess on the left, this kind of thing isn't weird. And you just wonder what's going to be like going forward. Is she going to do a solo interview?
Yeah.
And you just wonder how long it's going to be. I mean, yes, it's going to be a primetime special tomorrow night, but there's so many questions, again, about what is she going to show up. How many questions are just for Kamala Harris? How much does Tim Walz try to interject if she starts fumbling her way through? Is he really there as, like, the guardrails on, the bowling lane, okay?
Yeah.
To keep the bowling ball moving down the lane. And you just wonder if it's going to be that, how this is going to look. But, yeah, you brought up the Politico story. Yeah, they were asking journalists, who do you think we should talk to, which is a classic DC game. And we know this is something that the Harris administration has been doing with all these off-the-record chats with reporters so that they can explain Kamala's walkbacks for her. Yeah. Because Dana Bash just will have a list here to be able to say, all right, private insurance, okay, defunding, the police, and ending ICE, You should just go down the list. If these things are not answered, it'll be, political malpractice and something that we'll all be over harping on her for. So the pressure is definitely on for her.
And we saw a report yesterday, too, that Tim Walz specifically might be inclined to do interviews, but apparently he doesn't actually know the positions of the campaign. So they're not putting him out for interviews because he doesn't know how to answer the questions, because no one's actually come up with a clear vision for the campaign. Even as of today, the Kamala Harris campaign agenda doesn't exist on her website. So this has got to be a difficult thing to talk about if you have no idea what your actual agenda is.
Right. Yeah. Instead, we get this one interview that surfaced that Tim Walz did with a kind of, deadbeat loser, Seth Rogen lookalike, talking about gutters and, cheese-filled burgers in Minnesota. That's kind of what we're getting instead. And you just wonder, you even have liberal journalists. You had Aaron Burnett last week even wonder aloud if we should just ignore these, if Kamala is right to ignore us. Ana Navarro went on CNN this week too and said, "Oh, people are coming up to me in the grocery store," she does her own grocery shopping, and then says, "People are telling me she needs to ignore the media." I mean, we've never seen this before, Vince, where an entire political party, yes, maybe with Barack Obama, but where it was completely devoid of any policies. CBS did these man on the street segments last week, and you had Democrat after Democrat, not just in Chicago but elsewhere, say it doesn't matter what she believes. It is a vibes election, as the media say. It's all about defeating Donald Trump. They could not care less about her policies, which is remarkable, and it's really hard to fight against when you just have people that you want to talk about a cult. You say the Trump supporters are in a cult. Well, what is this when you have people voting for someone and they don't care what they believe?
Yeah, no, they're all walking around lifting up the throne, helping a carrier to the presidency. At least that's the goal. We'll see if it actually happens. Right. Thank you very much, Curtis Houck with NewsBusters. Always so good. Always so grateful to have you. Thank you, sir. Before CNN announced that they had this interview this week with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz together, CNN analyst Alex Thompson, a reporter over there, he had this to say on the air about why the campaign was hesitating to even put her on TV.
Basically, should she answer questions? And I think, as a reporter, I would be biased in saying, yes, she should. But is it a politically smart thing to do? And that's the debate also going on within Democratic Party circles. The fact is that, some of her worst moments as vice president were when she did interviews on camera, that she got a little flustered. She sort of did these roundabouts and answers about immigration or about COVID-19. And so that's the other thing that Democrats are thinking. Can you basically only do a few interviews? Is it strategically sound to just do a few interviews before then in November?
Yeah. Can we speak to the people as little as possible? Can we do that and win this election? Is that are we able to pull that off? So there you go. So the as of yesterday morning over on CNN, one of their analysts, Alex Thompson, saying the reason Kamala's not doing interviews, the camera tends to capture all of her worst moments. Oh, boy. All right, to the phones we go. Mary is calling in from Falls Church now on line 4. Hey, Mary, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey there. I wanted to comment on what you were talking about. First of all, I'm a big fan, listen every day.
Thank you.
I was listening to Chris Plant this morning, and I think it was Christy Shamblin was on this morning.
She was
the mother-in-law.
Yes.
Of one of the service members, and she had kind of testified online or on the phone that she didn't see any disruptions during the ceremony. It was a beautiful ceremony, and the Trump campaign was very respectful. And I found it interesting that within 2 hours, you've got Jerry Connolly's office issuing a press release saying, "Well, we need to see that report. Why don't you guys go ahead and release that report?" And I couldn't help but wonder, are they sitting around listening to WMAL just waiting for opportunities to send out press releases? I mean, if you look at Connolly's record, they didn't hesitate to shell out $2.9 billion to Afghanistan, which ended up in the hands of the Taliban. And then they also didn't really account for that money. Mm-hmm. He does a lot of work to help people that are anybody who's not in the United States. And then he actually starts to try to criticize the Trump campaign for showing up and kind of pushing those buttons, carrying the order for the Harris campaign.
Yeah, where was Jerry Connolly?
Yeah, I mean, his district is right next to Arlington Cemetery.
Exactly right.
He doesn't show up, and it's an election year. I'm kind of surprised he didn't show up. But then again, you know, why would he? He's got staff to send out press releases. But you know, he didn't show up, but yet he didn't hesitate to back the Biden-Harris administration in shelling out this money, and then expediting 8,000 visas to Afghanis. I guess I had a question, and you may be able to answer this. How many of the U.S. citizens that were left behind have they been able to expedite getting back into the United States?
I think they gave up on that. I don't remember them spending much time on that question at all. Getting away from anything involving the aftermath of Afghanistan was a priority for the Biden administration, Mary.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to me that, you know, Jerry he doesn't hesitate to have his staff, you know, engage in campaign activities from his official office. But then, you know, so anyway, thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, well, I've got some good news for you, Mary. Jerry Connolly's excellent Republican opponent, Mike Van Meter, is going to be joining us tomorrow. We'll talk to him about that and so much more. Stay with us.